good morning. And it is a miserable day out there. It is indeed a very miserable day out there. It's cold, it's raining, and it's not likely to improve. So I have deliberately decided to sit in front of a fire this morning to make you feel more comfortable. Look at that blaze. Whoa! Tell you, it's making my back warm. Anyway, let's go from the warmth into our first item of the day, which is the papers. Just to remind you that you're looking at the very, very attractive bar in the White Hart Hotel, where Tom Paine actually not necessarily pulled out his quill and wrote The Rights of Man, but certainly cogitated and formulated it in his mind. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous room, and it actually reflects in the fireplace. If you do find your way, whether you're watching in New Zealand or whether you're watching down the road, if you find your way into this bar, you will see etched into the fireplace the initials TP. And most people think it's Tom Paine, but it is not. It is Tom Pelham, who actually built this hotel as a house. It was his first residence. And then he moved just around the corner to another house, and that's when it became a roadhouse or a coaching inn. And it's a wonderful old place, and it's likely to be slightly altered in the not too distant future. So if you are in Lewis or you're coming to Lewis, catch it now. Come on in and see it as it is, reflecting the time, the 1500s, when in fact it was built. There we go. The White Hart. And I did have two beautiful ladies here with me a few minutes ago, but they scarpered. They've decided to let me go to work on my own. Never mind. That's what it's all about. And I've got the fire. Right. The news. And once again, Israel dominates the headlines, but this time because the United Nations has got into the act. And it says, as a roundup, the United Nations criticizes Israel and British cargo ship sinks. Those are the two main headlines in the newspapers. The Financial Times, it leads with the United Nations chief denounces clear violations of international law in the Gaza conflict. But it actually seems to be taking the side of Hamas. The latest developments from the conflict in Gaza lead many of Wednesday's front pages. The Financial Times reports on comments by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who told a meeting of the body's Security Council yesterday that Israel had committed clear violations of international law. Protecting civilians does not mean ordering more than 1 million people to evacuate to the south of Gaza, where there is no shelter, no food, and no medicine, and no fuel, and then continuing to bomb the south itself, he said. The paper says the remarks triggered a furious response from Israeli officials. So, a big row at the United Nations. The United Nations chief warns of violations in Gaza, provoking fury from Israel. The further quotes Mr. Guterres, describing the Hamas attacks as appalling, but adding that they did not happen in a vacuum and do not justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. The Daily Mail, the hand of peace from Israeli hostages, 85. From an Israeli hostage, 85, which means age 85, that shames Hamas killers. And then it's got a sub-thing, as the United Nations chief says Hamas raid didn't happen in a vacuum. Main headline, anger as United Nations boss attacks Israel over Gaza crisis. Gilad Erdan, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, has described Mr. Guterres' remarks as shocking and called on him to resign. The United Nations Secretary General, who shows understanding for the campaign of mass murder of children, women, this is a quote, and the elderly, is not fit to lead the United Nations, Mr. Erdan said. The Daily Telegraph. United Nations defense of Hamas is a tragedy, says Israel. Israel's foreign minister cancelled a meeting with Mr. Guterres because of the comments, asking him, "In what world do you live?" The paper also notes that French President Emmanuel Macron dropped calls for a ceasefire during a visit to Israel. It says that ahead of the trip, Mr. Macron's aides had briefed the press that he planned to call for a humanitarian truce during a speech alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But during the actual address, he said only that the first goal should be the release of all hostages. The Guardian. United Nations calls for immediate ceasefire to end epic suffering in Gaza. The Guardian is one of a number of papers to carry a picture of 85-year-old Yocheved Lifshitz, one of two hostages released by Hamas on Monday, shaking the hand of one of her captors as she is freed. The paper says Mrs. Lifshitz told the man shalom, a Hebrew word meaning peace, and often used as a salutation, and later said at a press conference that after some initial violence, she had been treated with care and gentleness. Daily Express. Peace gesture by freed hostages in the face of evil. It repeats the story of Mrs. Lifshitz, described as a symbol of humanity by the Daily Express. The paper calls the handshake a peaceful gesture in the face of evil and says it was fitting for a woman who, along with her still captive husband, Oded, 83, has been a peace activist all her life. Mrs. Lifshitz and Oded are now our known activists who have helped transport sick people out of Gaza to hospitals in Israel. Their families have said, while Oded is a journalist who has supported the rights of Palestinians for decades. The Times. My nightmare goes on, cries freed hostage 85. Wow, it's amazing the difference in interpretation of the same things that she said. The Times reports that while Mrs. Lifshitz spoke positively about the way she was treated once in captivity, she also said the Hamas militants had gone wild during the actual kidnapping. They attacked our houses. They killed and kidnapped both old and young with no distinction, she said. The Sun. My hell in spider's web of Hamas. My hell in spider's web of Hamas tunnels. Gran 85 tells of her ordeal. In comments quoted by The Sun, Mrs. Lifshitz says she spent her 16 days of captivity in a spider's web of underground tunnels and describes the experience as a nightmare. So many different interpretations of what she said and who she is. The Metro Brit cargo ship sinks in collision. The Metro reports on the sinking of a British-flagged cargo ship, the Verity, following a collision with a larger ship, the Polessi, off Germany's North Sea coast in the early hours of Tuesday morning. The paper says at least one sailor is known to have died, but that rescuers are clinging to hope that 4 missing crew members will still be found alive. The Mirror. It goes away from all the international news. Killer Noy and the Jungle Millions. The riddle of £40 million green scheme based at property where Brink's Matt Kingpin lives. Kenneth Noy, who served almost 20 years in prison for killing a man in a road rage incident in 1996, has links to a multi-million-pound scheme which is at the center of claims about land grabbing in the Amazon. The Daily Mirror reports this. It says Mr. Noy lives at a property that is also the headquarters of Amazon forest people, a project set up by his son to protect Brazil's rainforests, which, according to the paper, is being sued for £800,000 for illegal use of public land. It adds that sources close to Mr. Noy have insisted he is not involved in the project. Well, there you go. Now let's see what the Daily Star has to say. Psycho scumbag Vlad makes psycho scumbag critter crisis worse. What's he on about today? Red bugs under the bed. Oh, right. And the Daily Star says that Russian President Vladimir Putin is trying to exploit a rise in bed bugs in the West by planting fake news stories on the issue. It's bad enough without your help, the paper says. Right. Now, the latest, we'll go back to and have a bit more in-depth look in the news, but I want to make a comment. The statements that are made by various leaders, various ambassadors, and the United Nations really sometimes leave me breathless, because they all assume that we think that they are saintly, that because they are who they are, is they are the great and the good. They may be the great, but quite often they are not the good. One might well sympathize to some extent with what the chief of the United Nations has to say, and that peace in Gaza would be greatly desired. But in apparently reconciling his thinking with Hamas and attacking what Israel is now doing, is he really does mark the big problem with the United Nations. The United Nations, of course, was set up with just a few key European and American nations in the hope that it could steer a path and avoid another world war. But then, because it was the United Nations, it took in lots of other members. Until now, it's I'm not sure how many members it's got, but it's hundreds, and many of those are small countries which would not share any philosophical what should we say, passion with ourselves, the Americans, the Germans, the French, and to that matter, a large number of the major countries in the world, let's say those members of the G20. And is part of that reason is because they are small, they have very different values, and they see things from a small nation's perspective, without regard for the fact that the larger nations are in charge of policing the world. The Americans have, on several occasions, refused to pay their contribution to the United Nations, on one stage almost bringing it to the brink of closure, because they say that they are not represented. Their views are not represented by the United Nations because of this vast number, a relatively vast number, of small countries who do not have any empathy whatsoever, or sympathy for that matter, with the position of the United States. And as a consequence, I think that any utterances by the upper level of the United Nations has to be treated a little circumspection. And it seems to me that this is one of those cases. I can understand Israel being livid. Let's not be livid. But let us take into account that, yes, to some extent, Israel is entering into a knee-jerk reaction. And yes, they have, to some extent, ameliorated that stance after representations from the West, fearing another global conflagration resulting from this. But generally speaking, on this occasion, Israel did not start this. Hamas started it. And that is really where we need to lay the blame. The ongoing tension between Israel and its neighbor is primarily caused by the creation of the State of Israel, which came about because of the leading nations of the time in post-war world after the Second World War has to be taken into account. But the fact of the matter is those sort of tensions they can exist anywhere. They exist between Russia and Ukraine. They exist between China and Taiwan. They exist throughout Southeast Asia with some of the smaller countries who aren't at all pleased with what their neighbors do. Yes, those tensions will exist, but they are controllable tensions. Hamas took one step too far. And the fact that people are marching in support of Hamas by actually suggesting that they should wipe out the United Kingdom, wipe out America, apart from, of course, wiping out Israel, is just too far. Which leads me on to my view that we talk about a more peaceful age. And yes, look at me. I'm an old fart. I'm certainly old. As for the other, probably. But in talking to some of my colleagues and associates, and not necessarily of my age, not in their 80s, but not young anymore. At one time, we did love our neighbor. Yes, we would stand over the backyard and natter and gossip, and Mrs. Jones did so and so, and Mr. Smith did this, and did you know about the kids being caught scrumping? But we cared for our neighbors. We rallied around. And yes, if we criticized the government, generally speaking, it was universal, because we recognized that they'd done something that had upset us all. We were a nation. We didn't actually point the finger. There was, of course, a measure of self-preservation in anything that we did or said. But today, a lot of the name-calling, the finger-pointing, is not only vicious and bitter, but it is self-serving. And the me generation and the woke generation have really no sense of community, no sense that what they should be doing is, through their activities, contributing, not self-aggrandizing. I can say to you with a straight face, any bias in this television station is quite accidental. We deliberately are neutral, but that doesn't get down to the BBC's type of thing, is where one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, so let's not call a terrorist a terrorist. What it gets down to is that we believe that the people associated with this station and its viewers are fair-minded people who believe in justice and a decent way of life. We have no isms, and I, above all, am free of isms. I take people as I find them. I don't care what their color is, what their ethnicity is, what their religion is, or anything else for that matter. I take people as I find them. And if only we would start to do that as a community, as a society, we would all be better off. And I would suggest that perhaps the sort of thing that is happening in the Middle East now, while the tension would not be relieved, would at least be looking at things in a common sense way. The trouble is that because we think the way that we do, that's why we pop up with leaders. Our leaders do not actually what should we say, sympathize or even understand their electorate. They dash off and do things according to how they feel. Well, that's not really how it should work. That's not really what democracy should be about. And at one time it wasn't. Yes, there'll always be divides, there'll always be the elite, and there'll always be the unprivileged. But if society generally is trying to work towards making sure that those things aren't negative, then we will be happier and healthier in our body and our soul. But we don't nowadays. We march to satisfy some strange urgency to calm our own brains, to do silly things, to pull down statues of something that 200 years ago was accepted practice. And to be quite honest, the hypocrisy of it is that the people that, in the main who want to pull down the statues don't mind doing it from benefiting from what those people that those statues represent did in terms of their money. I can quote you closer to home. Actually, he hasn't been attacked as much as some. But mad, quote, Jack Fuller. Jack Fuller was filthy rich, and he made his money from plantations in the West Indies, which undertook slavery to make sure that they operated properly. And he was an advocate of slavery. But you would not be watching this right now if it hadn't been for Mad Jack's money. He supported Faraday, who experimented with making, quote, radio waves go through solid materials. It is still a key practice of electronics or physics or whatever you want to say, is a Faraday's cage, which is constructing something to actually trap those signals and to stop them from diffusing. He used that money to support Davy, who invented a lamp that miners could take underground and that would not explode when it met gas. He used that money to build the first lighthouse in Eastbourne and its first lifeboat. Are we now going to ban all lifeboats? We're going to pull down every lighthouse? Of course, you say, don't be so ridiculous. No, I'm not. I am being ridiculous. But that's exactly the thinking that takes place. And it's very sad that it takes place. And it shouldn't take place. I despair. I despair. Well, let's look outside and see what the weather is like, because it ain't very nice today. Not nice at all. So it's 15 degrees, and it's going to be 15 degrees more or less all week. But it started off at 9 degrees this morning. It's only 10 degrees now. That's cool. We can expect light rain. Yes, we had the light rain because I was caught in it. A light rain and a gentle breeze. The light rain will last until noon. Although I must say that it doesn't look as if it's raining right this very moment, but it looks pretty threatening. It will start to warm up to 13 degrees, if that's warm, by 11 o'clock. And that will last, but it'll be cloudy, no sun, until 2 o'clock. It'll reach 14 degrees. Yes, 14 degrees. And we'll see some sunshine break through the clouds. And that scattered clouds or scattered sunshine, whichever you want to say it, will last through until 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock this afternoon. And then throughout the night, it'll be scattered clouds. Not very much rain, I have to say. Not very much rain at all, at least until 11 o'clock tonight. Then tomorrow, we can expect thunderstorms and lightning and so on. But the same temperature, 15 degrees. Friday, 15 degrees with scattered showers, light rain. Saturday is light rain and scattered showers and a temperature of 15. So much the same until the weekend. And again, Sunday is pretty much the same. So that's the weather for today, and that's the weather for the week. I say right now, outside it is 10 degrees centigrade. 10 degrees. So I'm glad I got my fire going, because you need a little bit of heat, a little bit of warmth. And I got it. I hope you have. So if you're pretty aged like me, I don't know whether I'm going to get the winter warmer allowance, but some people will be getting it, and it won't be too far off now. So don't despair if you've got high fuel bills. They have even out the last little while, but we can pay for it, courtesy of the government, courtesy of Mr. Hunt, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, who is now under threat because he is threatening tax rises. And that has sent a chill through all those people who are in marginal seats. They will actually go under at the next election. And that is in the light of two by-elections in which the Tories were absolutely trounced. And I have to say that they were trounced in the local elections here. But everything turns. I got in the I forget what they call it now, but the little thing from locally that is put out by the district council. This is what we're doing, and so on and so forth. And not one of them has any practical application at all. They're all very worthy stuff. Oh yes, very worthy. But whether it's going to make a material difference to our lives, God only knows. I must say that I was a bit disappointed. No, I wasn't really, because first of all, these things are just propaganda. Anyway, whatever party is there and whatever the issues are, you don't really get much more than a skim of truth. But this one is failed to address the issues, the key issues that we're facing here, most of which is to do with development and housing. And it would seem to me that one of the things that this green lot aren't very keen on is criticizing those people that are going to actually build on green land, on what do we call it? Well, greenfield sites. Yes. Now, let's just take a deeper look at the papers, because we're living in horrific times. We really are, and every day there is something that is assaults us. I don't know. Am I being naive in thinking that we should start to think about our community? You know, the thing is that I really get very upset about. There are lots of worthy causes, and I'm not saying that some of these causes aren't worthy, but you know, this television station is planted firmly in the middle of the High Street, Lewis High Street. High streets around the country are getting into dreadful trouble. The high streets here have got empty shop after empty shop after empty shop. They're facing the same problems. One would think that the least they would do is to talk to their fellow traders about the issues. I saw the other day there is some committee or other that has been started to help the problems of the high street. I haven't heard a peep from it. Now we're an information disseminator. I haven't heard a peep from it. But we have held now two, for which we've paid. We didn't ask for any money. We've now held two. How about getting together and having a chat? And in these, let's not just blame the high street. Let's blame our leadership, because not one of the leadership came. Just one of the traders came. We had some wonderful times. They were fantastic affairs, the sort that you don't see anymore. But no traders from the high street. Well, one. That's naming me. He came from Fox, the real estate people. Nobody else. And if they say that they weren't invited, BS, because I marched up and down the high street delivering invitations to all of them. But not a sausage. No, did they come? No, they did not. And last Christmas, almost this time last year, we held a fantastic carol service here. Everybody went away with a glow, except for the traders and the powers that be, because they weren't here. And they don't bother their arse to actually do anything for the community. What they do is they send out a piece of paper or put it on the website about all the good things that they've done, which is also BS because it's propaganda. And it's about time that people actually got their fingers out and started to do things. And not only that, be seen to be doing things. Here I am. You know, I'm a journalist of 60 years. I've covered 2 royal tours. I've interviewed some of the great leaders of the world. And I don't know what our, by anything personal, what our MP looks like. I know what our past MP looks like, because he was a different kettle of fish. I don't know what our MP looks like. And that goes for Katie Bourne, having a clue what she looks like. Chief Constable, having a clue what he looks like. Fire Chief, having a clue what he looks like. Do they bother anymore to come knocking on the door of the press and say, listen, can we work in cooperation? Can we use you to let people know what we're doing? No. We put it on the web. What idiots. They put it on the web. If they look at their own statistics, they will find that out of the 100,000 people in the district of Lewis, over 50% are over 50. Just work back to when the web started, when Windows started, 1993. Over half their population grew up in an age that wasn't computer savvy. Computers were still great big machines that took up a whole room. Not what we've got today, a phone in the hand. So half those people are not in the habit of checking their information online. But no, we put it online and that's good enough. Nonsense. And the sooner that they actually come to grips with the fact that they've got to start communicating in the old-fashioned way, at least for the next 20 years, the better. But they won't. They won't. They will simply preen and say, look what we did. Katie Bourne said in the stuff that she sent out, don't worry, you re-elect me because more police now in the force than when I first took over. Well, where the hell are they? Because the only time you ever see them in Lewis is we see more of them because they're all going in and out of the courthouse. But on the streets, no, not a bit of it. The fact that there have been now surveys that the gut feeling of the populace is that we need more police back on the beat. The fact that, in fact, Suella Braverman has told chief constables, start following up on some of the smaller crimes, or stop sitting behind a desk and washing your hands. No, nothing has happened. You are so out of touch. It's frightening, absolutely frightening. Anyway, that's my take on things. I love it when I have a little rant in the morning. However, just because I'm able to smile and get a little bit of a grin out of it doesn't mean to say that everything I say with conviction. And that somebody somewhere might just take notice and start to give us back a healthy society, a society that cares for itself and not for the individual. Yes, it's important that the individual is taken into account in society. I always quote Jenkins' Era War. Jenkins was, I can't remember when, I think sometime in the 1700s, had his ear cut off by a Dutch, I think it was a Dutch customs vehicle off the coast of America. And we went to war to avenge Jenkins having his ear cut off. And that is used as an expression of the time that the state actually looked after the individual rather than the state. Well, we don't want a Jenkins Era War, but we do want just a little bit more compassion from our leaders who are totally and utterly out of touch. And you wouldn't think that they would be at the local level, when in fact they can find out what's going on. But no. They've got their political agenda and they've got to follow that. And to hell with what anybody's thinking. There is no, that's the trouble with our leaders, is there is no other way of thinking. It is how we think is right. And it's about time that you snap to attention. Well, we're not going to snap to attention. We're going to make sure that we hound you until such time as you start paying attention to the fact that we are a polyglot society, that we have a wide diverging range of views, and that you have to take into account when you're actually formulating your policies those views. You don't. I've never come across an age in which you are so remote and so determined to do whatever it is that you want to do, instead of perhaps trying to discover what there is in terms of consensus. It's shameful, absolutely shameful. Now let's go back to the papers, just to calm me down. The Times, the Daily Mail, and the Daily Express all carry pictures of 85-year-old Yocheved Lifshitz, one of two hostages released by Hamas on Monday, shaking the hand of one of her captors as she is freed. Peace gesture by freed hostage in the face of evil is the Express headline. The Times reports that Mrs. Lifshitz described her experience as a nightmare we couldn't have imagined. The Financial Times reports on comments by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who told a meeting of the body's Security Council on Tuesday that clear violations of international law had been committed, in further comments that the paper says sparked a furious response from Israeli officials. Mr. Guterres also said that the Hamas attacks did not happen in a vacuum and came after 56 years of suffocating occupation for Palestinians. The Eye and the Daily Telegraph both noted that Israel has called for Mr. Guterres to stand down over the comments. The Guardian says Mr. Guterres also said there should be an immediate ceasefire in Gaza to end what he called the epic suffering of people in the territory. The Telegraph reports that rain coming from the wrong direction during Storm Babette was to blame for the chaos seen in many areas. It says Environment Secretary Teresa Coffey has told MPs that most of our rain comes from the west, but the Storm Babette came from the south, meaning forecasts were less accurate. Ms. Coffey, the paper reports, said her department would conduct a rapid review to understand what could have been done better. It's the old thing, lessons have been learned, or lessons should be learned. The Mail is among a number of papers to report on comments by the former head of Ofsted, Sir Michael Wilshaw, in which he said it's nonsense that 9 out of 10 schools are now rated good or outstanding. The paper says Sir Michael told the Commons Education Committee that the ratings are giving false comfort to parents and that good ratings allowed head teachers to relax and not address the weaknesses at their schools. A rise in the number of people becoming vegan or vegetarian, combined with the pressure on household budgets, means we are eating less meat than at any time since the 1970s. That's what the Times says. It says that consumption at home fell by 12.5% in the year to March 2022, and that consumers are ditching beef, pork, and lamb faster than other meats. It says that over the past decade, consumption of these meats has fallen by 26%, while the number of people eating chicken is down by 11%. God, what are we eating? Well, I suppose vegetarianism and vegans. And the Daily Mirror says that just 22 minutes of exercise a day could reverse the effect of sitting for long periods of time. It says a study of 12,000 people over the age of 50 found that brisk daily walking, housework, or jogging could offset the impact of having an office job or watching TV all night. The author of the report, Edvard Saglev of the Arctic University of Norway, said the 22 minutes eliminated the higher risk of death from sedentary time, and of course that the more exercise can be done, the better. Well, I wish they would take me into account. I've got Parkinson's, so I can barely walk. So a brisk 22 minutes of jogging or whatever is out for me. I'm in a sedentary occupation. And as for housework, when I get home at night, yesterday I had Betty, my cleaning lady, come in. And when I got home, it was a joy to see because it was so nice and clean. And I really appreciated it. Doing it myself is within 2 minutes I've had it. I can't do anymore, simply because in not being able to walk, I also find it difficult to stand. I do as much exercise as I can, but it's a problem. So there've got to be ways, I suppose, of us fulfilling this requirement of exercise. I don't know what it is. I can't find it. I'm going to find useless comments on the web. But there we are. It is now 8:47. Do you want to see what I look like after my rant? Well, I'm still in front of the fire. Isn't that a wonderful fire? And the issues of today are really issues that we should take seriously. We should take seriously. But I'm sure that we do take them seriously, but we seem to have lost our way of community thinking. We've lost our way of being good neighbors. We've lost our way of worrying about how the community is faring. Our leaders are much more interested in their political beliefs and how they can impose it on the rest of us. Listen to Liza Page, and she thinks that this is a global disease, not just a local disease. But if the local politicians reflect what is happening in the world, then yes, and then we really have got a problem. The churches have emptied, token congregations, and yet love thy neighbor has got to be a tenet that we should try to strive to get back to. And it hasn't done the world too badly for 1,000 years or more. But whether it's that or whether it's something else, there's got to be new thinking. But as individuals, as citizens, we don't get excited anymore. You leave it to people like me to get excited and then have a go at us. Well. Fancy that. I say. 8:49. Now, this morning we go to at 10 o'clock. We go to Dr. Mark Mabey, our professor, resident professor, who is busy working with a project a project that is unique. It breaks the mold, and that's what I like. I love to see things that break the mold, because the mold isn't very satisfactory at the moment. He is working with two young men who have managed to raise, as I understand it, about £1 million so far, to establish a new university which has no lecture halls. That it is primarily, what I suppose, rejuvenating what we used to have in this country and we destroyed because of new nonsense thinking in education, is the apprenticeship scheme. Partly academic, but partly practical. And I absolutely agree with this concept. The main university will be established in Stoke-on-Trent for a variety of reasons, but it then will have hubs, or at least it will be the hub for satellites, if you like. And Mark would love to see Lewis, the first satellite of this university, which would be absolutely magnificent. It would bring jobs, but it also help educate in a real way youngsters who are finding it difficult to get onto the job ladder, because it's the old thing is, have you got experience? No. Okay, don't want you. Because most businesses now do not want to spend money on training people. They want them to walk in through the door ready trained. Well, this university will do that. And in fact, I can't tell you that the reality is reflected by this television station. We have had students galore, and they come in and they've all got their own idea of what television is about, and they nearly all disappear after a week or two because they find it too tough. It's not what they imagined. They walk in and think that they're going to be an executive producer's capacity, when in fact they still have got to learn how to deliver the coffee. They have no understanding whatsoever of the way a television station works. Well, one of the things that you might well say is, hang on, television is changing with Netflix and streaming and podcasts and so on. So, well, yes, it is changing. But the basic thing is that on your screen, you have got to see images, and those images have got to be produced. Yes, you can get AI to help. You can get all sorts of apps and things to help. But essentially, those images have got to reflect our society. They've got to provide information. They've got to show what's going on. And in the ultimate, they've got to entertain. None of that comes from machinery. Television is still going to be a vital part, even if it's in a different form to the one that we're used to at the moment. It's going to be a vital part of our society and the way that we talk to each other. So if you're going to be in it, just sitting in front of a camera and sounding off like me, who's had 60 years in this industry, sounding off like me ain't what it's all about. And some of these youngsters, if they're going to actually be of use and eventually put their own ideas into the mix, they've got to learn the basics. They've got to learn the groundwork. And this is what Mark is doing. And I hope that Mirador can work with him, and that the local council will take notice and give him some support to make sure that happens. But it's going to happen. They're going to actually target all sorts of other professions, and not necessarily what's known as professions, but skill-based workplaces. There are people with initiatives. There are people who understand what the problem is. There are people that touch the core. But as long as we have universities that massage and let's face it, tinker with the results so they get funding or continue to get funding, we've got a problem. And we've got to address that problem. And Mark and his young team are addressing that problem. Absolutely fantastic. And that we, as a television station, have been asked really to get involved. And that Lewis could become one of the centers, if you like, of this innovative process is exciting. Very exciting, except to you out there who could care less, because it doesn't affect you. Me. Well, get off your fat behinds and start to get behind some of these things. I hate it when I'm in a coffee shop and I see, let's call it what it is, middle classes come in and start to talk. They talk about anything and everything except how to develop and be involved in their community. Much more likely to be baby's rattles or how fast a motorbike can go. It's very sad. Very sad indeed. Well, I've had my rant this morning, haven't I? Yeah, and why not? Because sometimes it is essential that we do that. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to say goodbye for 10 minutes. We'll then be back with a program, probably from the archive this morning. And then we'll be joining Mark maybe, and following him is Plenty of Henty, who then takes the edge off my ranting and raving by having a lot of fun, looking back to the days of Max Miller, but also the effects that Miller had on the entertainment sector that we had today. So don't think that you're just going to get a lecture on Max Miller if you don't tune into John. First of all, he's a very funny man. And secondly, he's been there like me. He's been there and he's done that. And he actually opened up Radio Brighton. That was a good many years ago. It was only just been closed, of course. It's local. It reflects local people. Can't have that. BBC is such a dire organisation. It was on the downhill slope when I worked for it, and that was in the 1970s. It really has hit rock bottom now. It's as keen to put its money and resources in reality programs and stupid things. Now, in fairness, I will say this: it does drama rather well, and ITV does drama rather well. So after you've tapped those out of the equation, there's not much that it does well. And yet it's that small bit that's always controversial. They're always getting their fingers burned. Because once again, they are more worried about the BBC and ITV and so on than they are about reflecting what the public want. Oh, it's 8:59. I better go. I'll be back in 10 minutes or so. Okay. Let's let's see. We've got something to say goodbye with. Yes, we have.